Got two questions to talk to you about this morning. What now? Or maybe what next? And so what? That second one's especially tricky. Calls a lot of things into question and asks us to challenge some things. And presents me with a challenge of how I can be informative, maybe try to be a little bit inspirational in a year where we could use a little bit of that, but also to ask these hard questions. What now? And so what? And I have to approach this challenge with the additional challenge of doing this as an American, where in America, things are distinctly troubling. My views will be coming from my experience as an American in America, but my interests are fundamentally human and global. And you may need to interpret some of what I want to share to your region, but I'm going to urge you to avoid pretending that your region is immune to these concerns and questions, because America pretended that it was immune to these concerns and questions. That's how we got in this mess to begin with. So I'm not going to sugarcoat any of this. This has been a hard year on so many levels, a year with an unknowable future. It's not that somebody else knows and we don't. Nobody knows what comes next. We're facing hardships and uncertainty at a scale, depending on who you are, where you are, is disproportionate to things that we're used to seeing or even really understanding. So it's hard to get our heads wrapped around. But not just our own hardships and uncertainty, but the members of our community facing those hardships and uncertainty as well. So, that compounds the challenge. These are also existential times. I can't think of a better word than existential when we're talking about what's happened this year. On a micro scale, coworking spaces are closed. Some of them are staying closed for a long time, possibly forever. My coworking space has been closed for 6 months. We closed it the day before our state government mandated us to. And we're likely going to remain closed at least through the end of the year into early 2021, which means we also have mounting debt to a landlord who thinks that we're going to pay that full rent. We'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. But besides the financial concerns, we're forced to answer the most existential questions, which are who we are, what do we do, and why do we do it? And that's what I want to talk about today. Remembering that this is not my first existential crisis. It's most certainly our biggest to date, but we've survived for 14 years, which is how we've thrived for 14 years. You have to survive before you thrive. And in order to do that, we've come up with a few elements of a playbook that have worked well for us in the past and are a big part of how we're making decisions now. And a thing that I constantly remind myself and my team and our community is that while I don't know how things are going to go, the only way that we fuck this up is by losing sight of what really matters. So I want to talk about that. If you've heard me speak or read any of my articles or had a conversation with me or an email exchange with me, you know that there's only one thing that matters in coworking, and that's the people. And I'm torn on this because I think we've done a good job of getting people to say the words of the community being the most important thing. But if I'm going to be honest, I'm not totally convinced that most people really know what that means or put it into practice beyond the marketing. And I can prove it to you with a simple question. How do you take a photo of your community right now? What does that picture look like when you don't have a space to provide it a backdrop? It's an interesting question, isn't it? But I want to zoom out even further. Because I get a lot of emails. Some of them are from you. Thanks for sending those. I like them. I'd say about 1 in 3 emails that I get about coworking are some version of the same basic question. And it basically comes down to, I read your post about building the community first, and it makes so much sense. And sometimes this is people who are getting started and they realize that they can start on the right foot. Other times it's people doing some course correction and realizing they should have built the community first. And now they've just simply delayed the inevitable. But in all cases, by the time somebody is writing me an email about building the community first, it's because something in their situation is special. They've already got a building or a location in mind, or they've got a business partner who's got some special angle, and they're convinced that if they can just get the space open first, that people will start showing up like magic. And this is the part where if we were in person, the audience would chuckle, because as much as I know, that that's not how it works. Nobody just magically shows up because you unlocked the door and said, come on by. It just doesn't work that way. But recently, over the last several months, I've been getting a new kind of email. And the email says something to the effect of, I read your advice about building the community first, and it makes a lot of sense. But how do we do that when we can't host in-person meetups and events? It's another really interesting question, isn't it? Because the framing's all wrong. The question's about the meetup instead of about the people. It asks, how do I do a seemingly impossible thing that I didn't really want to do in the first place, but you told me I'm supposed to? Instead of a much simpler and straightforward question, which is, what do people and communities need while it's unsafe to attend in-person meetups, and while it's unsafe to work from co-working spaces, shared workspaces? And let's be clear here, COVID is undeniably destroying lives. But even more than killing people and making them sick, COVID is showing us the parts of our systems and society that are already weak and broken, and in many cases have been weak and broken for a really long time. I'm talking about economic and social systems that don't provide safety nets and have made it clear that rich people with white-collar jobs can work from home, but poor people with blue-collar jobs, they have to go work on the front lines, putting themselves, each other, and their families at risk. We've got healthcare systems, especially in America. It's bad in a lot of places, but in America, we've got clearly understaffed systems, underprepared systems that are structurally unable to keep up with the wave of sick people that they're seeing. We've got supply chains that are completely upended, making food prices fluctuate, hard for restaurants, hard for consumers, and everyday goods are unavailable for months at a time. My wife and I tried to buy a backup refrigerator and couldn't get anything because the supply chain is so out of whack that ordering something today means I won't get it for over 6 months. Something as simple and silly as a refrigerator. And governments. Don't get me started on governments, but everywhere, but especially the ones led by an adult-sized toddler with a Twitter account, unable to muster the political willpower to keep their citizens safe. We're learning so quickly and in so many ways, painfully, deeply painfully, that the things that we depend on the most weren't all that dependable to begin with. And so for me, COVID is like a tracing dye being injected into our society, like the tracing dye that gets injected into cancer patients to make their tumors show up on film. COVID is just showing the parts that are sick, not just the people. And if we come back to the world of co-working, it's no different. I watched operators of co-working spaces here in America, but around the world, delay closing their doors to their members until their government mandated it, even though it was clearly in their members' best interest for them to stay home. I watched spaces then leap to spend small fortunes on plexiglass dividers and buckets of hand sanitizer, hopeful that members would come back a little bit sooner, instead of seeing that a space with all the best safety precautions in the world, that a space designed to bring people together, is a safety risk right now. And maybe most frustratingly, I watched webinar after webinar marketing things like how to sell virtual office memberships, instead of asking the simple and most critical question, what do the people in our community need now, so that they're even around to be our members in the future? And that's what we asked ourselves at Indie Hall. Within those first couple of days, we knew we were going to have to close. We asked ourselves, what are our priorities and where are we going from here? And we made it clear to our community that our top priority is making sure that they were safe and supported. Not getting them to come in and use the workspace, not getting them to keep paying membership, to make sure that they were safe and supported in one of the scariest, most challenging times they may have faced in their entire lives. We shifted 100% of our energy into safe online resources to bring our members together and help them help each other. Something we've always done. But now it's got 100% of our energy. Part of the other piece of that is that it's not us doing everything. And you've probably heard me talk about this before. This is not us providing services for people. This is us providing platforms for people to help each other. That's at the heart of what has always worked. Do all of our members participate? Of course not. Not all of our members participated in the co-working space either. But the ones who are participating now are telling us on a daily basis that Indie Hall has become a critical lifeline for staying both socially and professionally connected, staying calm and sane, and feeling supported, like there's even the potential for them to come out of this on the other side. And many other people tell us that even if they're not using it, how glad they are to know that it's there if and when they need it. We also made it clear to our community that our second priority was keeping our staff employed by any means necessary. Our community values the team. The community knows that Indie Hall can't tick without the human support of the team. And so we made it clear that our financial priority was our team's employment, and the community responded with the desire to support however they could. Not pay the rent, but pay the staff. Which brings me to the third point about our priorities, which is that we also made it clear that our landlord is the last priority. And if there's any landlords watching, you're not going to like hearing that. But we made it clear to our landlord that our members want to come back once it's safe. So it's in the landlord's best interest and our best interest, our mutual best interest, to not bankrupt us with the mounting debt of the months that we can't use the space. Us staying solvent is the landlord's fastest path to seeing any amount of money, and avoiding the scenario where bankrupting us puts the empty space back on the market where they're competing with everybody else for a tiny pool of tenants. Meanwhile, we've been bankrupted as a byproduct. We focused all the resources that we have, everything we've built up over the years. That's financial, that's physical resources, tools that we have, making those tools available to members who are setting up a at-home workstation. Need a monitor? You can borrow one of ours. You need a desk? You can borrow one of ours. The stuff we've got, why not make it available? And not to keep charging, but to make sure people can continue moving forward for however long they need to, so that when we come back, there's a thing to come back to. But more than the stuff, we focused on that sense of togetherness and belonging that we always have. We focused on a professional and social networks where you can build trust and relationships and earn knowledge and opportunities before you need them. If you wait to when you need them, often it's too late. And we focused on the deep well of collaborative potential that we know exists within a community like ours, where everyone has the potential to contribute to solving somebody else's problem. The net value is the people, period. Maybe most critically, Indie Hall exists to help people form relationships and bonds, however it needs to happen. But over the last 6 months, we've been hearing almost every week from a member who says that they've formed more bonds and stronger bonds over the last 6 months online than they did over the previous months or years being a member of a co-working space where they're coming in on a regular basis. Once a week, 3 days a week, even full-time members, feeling closer to other members through our online community than they did going to the physical space. So I do not believe it when you tell me that a physical space is necessary to do the things that we do. So here comes the real talk. A lot of people have adopted language around community and events and meetups, but they only use it as an excuse to sell their shiny shared workspaces. They didn't care about who showed up so long as somebody showed up. And now, people see the space as a risk instead of an asset. The space part of co-working spaces has always been more of a risk than an asset. It's been a distraction from the stuff that matters the most. It's expensive, it's hard to maintain, it's the part that everybody's going to copy, turning what you offer into a race to the bottom. And maybe, thankfully, 2020 just slapped us all back to reality. Yeah, I said thankfully. Let's look at this conference as an example. What normally happens at a co-working conference? You get speakers on stage telling stories, talking about their work, their examples to teach and inspire. You've sponsors selling, furniture and software? And you've got, in the best cases, conferences like this one. I heard so many great things about this event last year. I was so sad to miss it in person then, and I'm so mad that we can't be together right now. Because in the best cases, you've got the people, the vibe, the shared excitement about what's possible and what we can do together. So what happens in an online conference? What's left when you take away the physical space? You get stories, you get relationships, and you get to focus on right now, what's right in front of us, with no distractions. And that's all thanks to 2020, a year full of horror and anxiety and pain and death and loss. Some of our biggest distractions are gone too. Maybe that's a blessing. Now look, I'm not saying this year is easy, or that the future will be either. I'm saying that if you actually look around, it's never been clearer what matters and what doesn't. Let's not waste that. Instead of focusing on how to reopen your space or the land rush for all of these new remote workers and how you're going to create spaces for them, focus on your community again. Maybe for the first time. Know who you're serving. Find out who your community really is. Find out what they need, how they hurt, what you can do to make sure that they're there in the future. It's not too late to reconnect. Go find out how the people you've abandoned are actually doing. Thanks.